Hey everyone, I am Brian Breitholtz. I am the alumni director at Cleveland State, and I am half of the partnership that created the Women's Leadership Symposium. We always get a kick out of it being created by two men over a cup of coffee talking about women's empowerment. Not something you typically have two middle-aged guys doing, but that's how we started the Women's Leadership Symposium. Due to COVID, we shifted and began this as a virtual series, which in many ways has opened us up to many more new folks. So, although we do miss the in-person experience, we are able to actually attract folks who are from Cleveland and all across the country in this new format. So, while we're still dealing with COVID, we will continue this as a series of virtual programs, and we're just very happy to have you all with us today. One of the keynoters at the symposium is Justice Melody Stewart, and we're so pleased that she was able to do this with us virtually today as part of our lunch series. Melody Stewart was elected in November of 2018 to a full term as the 161st Justice to serve on the Supreme Court of Ohio. Justice Stewart is the first African-American woman elected to the Ohio Supreme Court. Prior to joining the Supreme Court, Justice Stewart served on the 8th District Court of Appeals. Justice Stewart has more than 30 years of combined administrative, legal, and academic experience. Justice Stewart earned a Bachelor's of Music degree from the College Conservatory of Music at the University of Cincinnati, her law degree as a Patricia Roberts Harris Fellow from the Cleveland Marshall College of Law at Cleveland State University, and her PhD as a Mandel Leadership Fellow at Case Western Reserve University's Mandel School of Applied Social Sciences. She was also awarded an honorary Doctor of Laws degree from Cleveland State University. We are so proud to feature one of our very own. Please join me in virtually welcoming Justice Stewart.
Unmute myself. I could hear all the virtual claps. Thank you very much for having me. And thank you all for attending this afternoon. I recognize quite a few familiar names and faces, some of which I'm saying, I should be listening to you making presentations about this, but good afternoon, everyone. I first wonder when I do virtual meetings like this, how many of you are in furry slippers or mismatched socks, or maybe even just downright barefooted, right? It's a wonderful option to have these days, I have to tell you. It's for me, I may not remember how to put on nylons and heels when this is all over. And so I say that to say, if after this pandemic is over and any of you see me in public with a nice suit on or a dress or a skirt, and I have on mismatched socks or maybe my house shoes, please pull me over to the side and whisper in my ear that I might want to rethink my footwear. Okay, you promise to do that? So my topic today is what does leadership look like to you? And I'll talk a bit, but I really want to reserve a larger part of this segment to questions that you all might have, because listening, you might come to this segment with some ideas and some questions, or it's something I might say might generate those. So I want to be sure that we get as many of those in as we can. So when we think of what does leadership look like to you, we generally think in the context of people who are seeing and vision as in physically looking at someone, not vision as in the sense of having some imagination or creative or innovative idea about the future. But if we think about what leadership looks like, there have been so many studies done, probably ad nauseum, on these topics and the types of leadership. And we know from a lot of research that we think leaders have certain physical attributes. Height, of course, is one of them. A deep voice is one of them. And of course, when we think of height, there are studies actually done that says the taller you are, the higher your income level is, the more responsibility that you have, those sort of things. And so, again, having a deep voice, and then those who are what we call physically fit. So does that mean if you're not tall for your gender category, and if your voice is not relatively deep, and of course men generally have deeper voices, or if you don't have a model-like physique to be on a magazine cover, then you should just throw in the towel about ever being a leader in any realm. And obviously that's not true. And of course, the type of leadership or the type of leader or being in a leadership position also depends on the environment and the organization in which you are looking to lead. So, and when we think of leadership too, we think of titles, president, CEO, chief, those sort of, heads of departments, heads of states, heads of company. And we think of those. So you can be a leader just by virtue of having the title, being given the title of the leadership position in your particular organization. So, all that is true. And we talk about leadership styles. We talk about servant leadership. We talk about visionary leaders. And all those things are things that I have studied over the years, but I have to tell you, and I'm going to admit this to this group for the first time, I have to say that I don't know that I've embraced any of those things, because at the end of the day, I don't have a lot of control over how tall I am. Sure, we can augment our height a little bit, ladies, when we wear heels, but by and large, it's not going to be a significant difference. I guess 4-inch heels, assuming you can walk in them, might be significant to you. We don't really change our voices all that much. I think I tend to have a voice that's on the deeper side for females, but I also think it's somewhat nasally sounding. So now I say that, and all of you are going to now hear this nasal sound for the rest of the afternoon. So I try to, make corrections with that. Or if, your posture is better, your voice articulates more. And physically fit, we just won't even go there. I am one of the ones that put on the COVID-5 or COVID-10 or, whatever. I should be working out more. I don't. So I have some control over that, but only minimal control over that. So what does that mean? I can never be a leader. I'd like to think that I have better control of my knowledge and my actions. And those are the things that can make others decide whether I am in a position of leadership. And for me, the significance of leadership, if I had to pigeonhole myself into a category, I would say I'm a servant leader in that I will lead by example in doing something for the better good of society, or for the better good of another group of people, or for the good of another individual. And that's been my approach as long as I can remember, almost in anything that I've done in work. And I particularly feel that way as an elected official, that my job, my responsibility as a statewide elected official is to do the absolute best that I can in my position at the Supreme Court for the good of every person and entity in this state. And that's even so if I feel like the decision is contrary to a position that would be personal to me, that would either benefit me personally. We take an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States, the Constitution and laws of the state of Ohio. And that's what I am to do. Now, I have to tell you, sometimes that job or those interpretations of the things we have to do is challenging when you have to deal with legislation that may not have been thoughtfully drafted, when you have conflicting laws, or when you have a statute that conflicts with the Constitution. And then when we talk about, some jurists categorize themselves as originalists and textualists. And, I don't get into those titles either, because I really, quite frankly, don't know what they mean when it comes to doing your job the way you should do it. I'm not sure that the framers of the Constitution, back in the days when women and people of color weren't citizens, were the laws then crafted with the best interest of all of society in mind. And so those are perspectives from which I think we have to work as people who work in the areas of law, who practice law, and certainly for those of us who are judicial officers and who interpret the law. So I think that the opposite of leader is not necessarily a follower. You don't really have to be either. I think the best word between those two, you can be a follower, you can be a leader, or you can be neither, is a contributor. And what is it that you contribute to your little part of the world, be it your workplace, or be it your community, or be it your society? Um, I just feel a calling or a passion to do as much as I can in the short time that I am here on this planet and am able-bodied to do certain things. When if my mind starts to go, I would trust that my family members and friends would tell me it's time for you to sit down or step aside or take up knitting or something of that nature. Because being at the appellate court level on the Supreme Court, we issue decisions where I am sometimes the author. And it's interesting because when we write decisions, although they are authored by a particular justice, sometimes that opinion has input from other justices. And so, but the person whose name is on that opinion will take the brunt of that opinion, be it praise and accolades, or be it ridicule and criticism. And we are subject to that, but that's part of the job. And so you've got to have a tough skin about those things. And if you're faithful to what it is you're supposed to do in your workplace, then those things shouldn't bother you, or hopefully won't bother you as much. I also think that there are leadership qualities that you have to discern whether other people think they are important. Your height obviously might not be important to whether you have a good work environment and a good atmosphere in your workplace. Your voice may not be relevant to whether you treat people with respect and whether people who work with you feel valued. And I think that what has worked for me all of my life is listening more than talking. Trying to understand the perspectives of other people, always, always, underline always, trying to put myself in the shoes of someone else, either someone else that I'm talking to, someone's perspective that I've never had, someone who's in a situation that is perplexing or that is distressing. And always, we learn, a lot of us growing up, that, you treat people the way you want to be treated. And that works, I think, for a lot of us. But the younger generation we used to call it the golden rule. I think now it's called the platinum rule. For a younger generation, you treat people the way they want to be treated. And because it might be different from your perspective. And so in this time of social unrest and all the things that are going on in our country, one of the things that I think is important that we do is look at where we are in our workplaces, in our organizations, and look for ways that we might not be addressing what is best for the community that we serve, or what is best for our clientele, or what is best for the people with whom we work. Because if there is some policy or some procedure or some action that discriminates against anyone in any way, in any form or fashion, or that doesn't utilize or take advantage of the best that that person has to offer, we may need to reevaluate things. One of the great things I think that has come from this pandemic is we have to turn on our heels and shift and do a lot of things differently immediately. I mean, there wasn't a whole lot of time to prepare for it. In a lot of ways, it's been tremendous. It's been great. It's showed the versatility and the diversity and the way we can pivot And there are a lot of things that I hope we never go back to after we get through this health crisis. And so maybe it has taught us to be more innovative. Maybe it has taught employers in the workforce that working at home is not such a bad thing after all. Maybe people are more productive. For years, of course, as we know as women, that was frowned upon, and particularly in the legal profession, when it was very difficult for women to get into large law firms because they had responsibilities at home, primarily as mothers and caregivers, yet they were still able to get the job done. But if you, for some reason, if you weren't physically there and having coffee in the hallway and meeting at the water fountain, that you were seen as less productive. Well, now I think we're all seeing that wasn't true. And maybe it took a pandemic for us to realize the value of people who can still get the job done and who are responsible to get the job done, regardless of where they are and regardless of whether they're barefooted or in heels. And so those are some of the positives that have come from this. I want to kind of just conclude and wrap up so we can have some opportunity to talk about other things. I would implore everyone to never let any preconceived notions of what a leader looks like hinder your leadership growth or your emergence in any sort of way. We have a varying level of confidence in what we do. And we all have insecurities also, all of us. Some of our insecurities rear their heads more often than others, but we all have them. I'm often reminded of a former colleague of mine who was very confident in her abilities, and she would just tell you right off the cuff, "Hey, if I can't lead the band, I don't want to play in it." And that was just her philosophy, and she didn't. So she always had leadership positions. Every time one became available, she applied for it. And before I forget too, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of the pictures or portraits of power by Alejandro Almaraz. I think you can find it online at alejandroalmaraz.com. And it's interesting because he has a panoply or an array of portraits. It's called Portraits of Power. And it goes to show how, from a visual perspective, what images of rulers over various countries have looked like over the years. And they're superimposed pictures of leaders at different times. And I don't want to say much more about that, but just take a glance at that if you can. It'll be amazed. So I think it's Alejandro, Alejandro, Almaraz, Almaraz.com. And it's his Portraits of Power. I'm going to put that in before I forgot. So that's, I'll wrap this up with a little bit of kind of my trajectory over the years. As most of you know, I was born and raised here in Cleveland, raised by a single mother in the Huff neighborhood of Cleveland. And so growing up, as I did in the 60s and 70s, African-American women in general, but particularly African-American women, only had certain roles that were imaged for us. They were, if professional, it was teacher or nurse. But for the most part, they were blue collar jobs. My mother worked at the post office. People worked at clerks like at Hallie's or Higbee's and May Company, or at the local grocery store, or in domestic service of that sort. And so I remember having a conversation recently with the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, telling her how my being on the Supreme Court wasn't even in the realm of possibility for my life. One, I don't even think I knew what the Supreme Court was, probably until I got to law school. And then to imagine getting there and being there just wasn't even on my radar. And so I often tell younger people, particularly high school and college students, I'm telling you right now, if you don't know what you want to be when you grow up, don't worry about it, because I'm still trying to figure it out. And you don't even know what you don't know. You don't know the possibilities that are really available to you. and you don't know your 21-year-old self yet, or your 25-year-old self yet, or your 30 or 40-year-old self yet. And they all might be very different people, so be prepared. And people say in the position that I'm in now that I got lucky, if you want to think that, okay. But we know what luck is, of course. It's when preparation and opportunity meet. And the only thing you can control is the preparation part. So do everything that you can do to the best of your abilities. And that has always been my mantra, either unconsciously or consciously, that I do the best where I am. Because when you're doing your best, other people recognize that. And they open doors for you. They might suggest that you run for an office, or they might suggest that you apply for a certain job. And please take to heart when people notice things about you that you may not even notice about yourself. And so those are the doors that open, and that's the opportunity. And if you're prepared, then they will intersect and you can walk through that door. And so when I was saying to the chief, this wasn't within the realm of possibility for me, it's because there were people, I didn't know people who were lawyers. I didn't know people who were judges and had positions in the public sector and government in this way. And of course, if I did get exposed to it, when I did see pictures, there weren't people who looked like me. And so as a small child, and a child growing up African-American community, we just thought that those were jobs that were not for us, not necessarily based on discrimination, because I don't know if I knew what discrimination was at an early age either, but just that those were not jobs that people who looked like me do. And so we've got to get past that notion, because we can do anything. And I think even the advent of professional sports for women and the acceleration of that has shown that too. Now, at my age and based on my gender, I can never be a wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns, and not, at least not in this generation. I don't have the physical acumen to do it. It's not possible. But will there be a professional football association for women one day? I wouldn't be surprised. Basketball is getting more notoriety. The women's soccer team is getting more notoriety. So we look at jobs, and we look at more women firefighters and more women in the military, more women in construction. And to the extent that they're physically able to do the job, they should be able to compete for any job. Now that brings us to jobs or opportunities that don't require your physical attributes. And there, the skies are absolutely the limit for women. And in some instances, and I'm sorry for any of the guys who might think this sounds sexist, in some regards, I think women might even do a better job, that just because there's a different perspective. And I believe in diversity at all levels, ethnically, by gender, just whatever diverse and different perspective someone can bring to a situation, I think it's good. It's what's good for the goose is good for the gander. And I think that should happen. And I'll close with this example. And I don't remember the exact names. Remember several years back in California, there was a young girl who was kidnapped by a couple. She was kept for years, basically in a makeshift shelter in the backyard, who was repeatedly sexually abused by the man in the house, impregnated by him a couple of times, and she was actually raising her daughters in this pig pen in the back, who had been fathered by her rapist. And this guy was a sexual predator. So he had to have law enforcement physically come and check on him at several intervals during the year. And at no time in all the decades that they checked on him, did they ever check his backyard to find this young girl who grew into a young woman. And the name, I see her face clearly, and the name escapes me, and I'm sorry for not having it, but I think some of you probably know who this is. And he had gotten so brazen with his crime that one time he went to, I think, a local university for something with this young girl, this young woman and her children. And there were two female police officers who just noticed something wasn't right about the situation, and who thought enough to separate the guys strategically from the girls, from the young woman, a teenager at that time, I think, to ask her, what's her name? Is the situation okay? Only then was it discovered that she was a child who had been kidnapped lost to the public for decades, and impregnated by this man. And so I want to say Garreau is his last name or something like that. But that's an example where all the men who came and inspected that house to look for anything that was untoward or different never realized, and I believe there might have even been an example where the girl was seen once. And so we all have gifts and perspectives to offer and to bring to anything that we do. And the door or the path we walk down might not be the one we're supposed to walk down. And as you all know, I'm sure, sometimes doors don't open for us until others are closed. And so anytime there is a refusal to accept something that you bring to the table, or what you see as a rejection from a job or an opportunity, just consider it a redirection, because maybe that's not where you're supposed to be at that particular time. So I thank all of you for your time and your attention, and I'll take any questions that you all might have now.
Justice Stewart, first of all, I want to thank you so much for your comments. And you might not have noticed, but I have been writing notes, scribbling throughout. So you gave many good pointers. So thank you. Something I wondered first when you talked about people who didn't look like me, the importance of role models. And I'm wondering, when you were growing up, who were your role models? And how has that changed over the years?
I had a lot of them. And first, I would be remiss and probably kicked out of my family if I didn't recognize the fact that my younger sister is in the audience. I put up the gallery view, and there she is, front and center. So Paula Elder, hi, little sister, how are you? And hello to a lot of you that I've worked with, and I know either from the university or from the law field. So I appreciate all of you being here. I had wonderful mentors during my life. My first one, I have to say, without question, is my mother, who has been deceased for 20 years. But my mother was a Black woman who was raised in the segregated South, where schools only went up to the 8th grade. And she used to tell me about, their treatment, and she was one of 11. And as they left 8th grade, they would move up north with an older sibling. And I didn't know, my mother was so well self-taught that I didn't know until after she died that she never even graduated, that she only went up to the 8th grade, never graduated from high school. My mother got her GED the year before I graduated college, and then went on to take classes at CSU with the Project 60 program. But my mother acted a caramoo, and she wrote poems, and she read all the time, and she stressed the value of education. And she worked overtime at the post office so that I could study music at the Cleveland Music School settlement. And although we had, Motown sounds and Ray Charles and Aretha Franklin playing on our stereo regularly at home, we also had Chopin and Beethoven and Bach playing. And I'm embarrassed to say, when I was a little girl, I used to walk through the house like this sometimes when she played that classical music. Go figure. I studied classical piano and was a music major in undergrad. So you see, it's the exposure. It's the exposure that's important. But then over time, too, when I got to high school at Beaumont, the Ursuline sisters, there were several who inspired me to do things. I was the first African-American student council president at Beaumont School, and that would have never happened, repeat, never happened, had one of the administrator teachers not pull me aside and think that I should run for office. It was a time when Beaumont was integrated the most it had ever been integrated at that time, and who pulled me aside and told me she thinks it would be a good idea if I ran for vice president. Now, in retrospect, I don't know why she said vice president, because I decided to run for president instead. But it was probably the beginning, the genesis to my running for anything, because back in those days, I just ran to catch the bus to go home. So that high school, and then college were difficult years for me down in Cincinnati, since the University of Cincinnati wasn't a great climate for students of color in the 80s. But I did get a wonderful education at the Conservatory of Music, notwithstanding the fact that some people thought a Black female shouldn't even be a classical piano major or theory major. Like, what are you doing here? Why don't you start studying something like education or nursing? But still got a good education nonetheless. And then I have to say the overwhelming majority of my mentors have come in the law field, in the legal profession, from the days of starting off my law career as an assistant law director at the City of Cleveland Law Department, and all of those lawyers there. It's interesting. I tried my very first case as a legal intern, a third-year law student, and the spouse of the lawyer who was supposed to guide me through that process, I see is on the Zoom. I won't mention his or her name either, but it's just the rich history. It goes back to helping me navigate my way through the legal profession in preparation for the bar. And then really, when I decided to run for office, there wasn't a single solitary judge in Cuyahoga County, male, female, Black, white, Democrat, Republican, who turned down a request for me to talk to them about running for office. And so I try to do the exact same thing for anyone who think I might have anything to lend by way of mentorship or helping to answer some unanswered questions for them.
Thank you so much, Justice. Elizabeth, I've noticed a couple of chat questions popping up. Can you help facilitate that?
Let me just turn off my heater here. It got a little cold in my house. Okay, there we go. All right, we do have a couple. One is, I'm struck by how varied your career has been and wondering how you think that has contributed to your career path, and what is the biggest risk or pivot you've taken in your career?
Wow. I see that message is from Kelly King, whose mother I work with at the City of Cleveland Law Department, who's gone on, who's passed. But it's so this. I'm trying not to make this all too emotional because of all the people I know or see or in the connections I have in this virtual session. But it's only varied, not because necessarily I've chosen it to be that way. I mean, in simple terms, I studied music because when I was coming out of high school, and my mother took the time, energy, and effort to send me to a college preparatory school, that told me when I entered 9th grade, I was going to college. And not that I never questioned that or never didn't want to go to college, but so I knew I was going to college. So then when I graduated, the time came to deciding what it is I was going to do or study in college. The only thing I wanted to study in college was music. Now, I had no connection between what I was studying and gainful employment. Didn't even think about that. Just like I didn't think about it in high school, other than the jobs I had to have extra money in my pocket and put gas in the car and be able to go to dances. In college, to me, it was a total learning process. I never even thought once about what I would do as in a career with a bachelor's of music degree in music theory and composition. Never envisioned it, but knew that's what I wanted to study. I also didn't know then that it was important, so important that when you're studying something you love, that your grades are naturally probably going to be better. And so I'm glad of that, because then I had a decent grade point average to get into law school. And I can't imagine, and when I was assistant dean for admissions at Cleveland Marshall, I would tell students, people who thought they had to take political science or government or pre-law because they knew they wanted to go to law school, I said, well, that's fine if those are subjects you're interested in, but if not, take something you're interested in that you love, be it accounting, be it art history, be it music, be it basket weaving, whatever it is. Basket weaving, be sure you get some reading and writing in there, but do what you love, because your grade point average will be great. Because to get in law school, all you need is a good grade point average and a good LSAT score. We don't care what the degree is in. So I didn't know that. And I took my music degree and promptly got a job in the healthcare industry out of law school. So go figure. But again, it's what you do and how you do it. So I did that because I only wanted to study music. At my job at the healthcare office where I work, the vice president was in law school at the time. He'd come in, he'd sit his books down. I'd peruse through them. They looked interesting. I applied to law school on a whim. I got in. I spent 3 years saying, do I really want to go to law school? Do I really want to be a lawyer? And I didn't know what I wanted to do, but I knew having a law degree would make me gainfully employed and allow me to pay my bills and be independent. And then that just started everything else from rolling. Got into law academe when my legal writing professor approached me and said, hey, want to be an adjunct instructor for me? Sure. So I was an assistant law director for the cities of Cleveland and East Cleveland while an adjunct instructor in legal writing at Cleveland State. Then a lot of people don't know this, but I even went back to Cleveland State and started a master's degree in music composition while I was working at the university. And that was wonderful for me too. And I've had the opportunity to compose music for a small independent film. And so the music is what I love. And I think I loved it too much to try to make a living doing it. So it's more of a hobby for me because I have friends who are professional musicians and artists who are just who struggle and who hit the grind all the time. And I don't know that I was built to do that. So I just kind of have music as a love. And so that's why I tell people too, some people say, do what you're passionate about. And you can do that. And some people can work that in a way that they earn a living and that they're very good at and that they can be productive and again, make a decent living. Or you can make a living and then do what you love and not have to rely on it for your income. And that's the path I chose.
That's wonderful. And it actually leads us into the next question, which is, what led you to law school, which you kind of answered with your background as a musician. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that any further, but we can also move on to the next one if you feel like you covered it.
Well, yeah. What led you to law school from your background as a musician? Yep, I did cover it.
Okay. The next one would be, what characteristics do you believe are most important in an effective leader?
Well, that's always an interesting question because I like to turn it around to the person who asked. What characteristics do you believe are important for a leader? And take people who are your bosses or who head your departments or who lead your city or your city government, your local government, or your state or your national government. And let's even talk about that. We have the presidential election coming up. I mean, there are millions, count them, millions of people who believe that our current president has great leadership characteristics. And yet there are millions of people who couldn't think otherwise. So it is, your individual, I guess, preferences. What do you think is a good leadership characteristics? For me, my current leader, if you will, in my workplace would be the Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court. Now, we're all equally yoked by way of our judicial responsibilities. So she is not my boss. She can't tell me how to vote. She can't tell me what to do. And most of the decisions at the court she can't make without the other 6 of us weighing in. But she does have independent leadership responsibilities when it comes to some administrative matters, and she oversees the rest of the court. So, the administrative director answers to her as well as us and all the department heads. And so we're all treated with equal respect, but she heads the court and she heads the judiciary for the entire state. Again, judges are all independent. We're not a unified court in Ohio, so everybody's elected individually, and either the chief or either of the 6 associate justices can tell any judge in this state what to do individually. But collectively as a court, we can discipline lawyers across the state. We can discipline judges. We can require certain actions be done when a writ is filed in our court. We can mandate certain public officials to do certain things. And so that is power that's inherent in the job. So I think one of the important characteristics is how do you go about exacting that authority or exacting that power. I'm not one to believe in heavy-handedness. I always think conciliatory efforts are good. I've always tried to run my staff or have my job make my people who work with me feel equal to the task before us, but at the end of the day saying it is my responsibility, so you don't have that pressure. You know, I'm the one that's in the position to get the, you know, the pressure of the backlash from something, but and I will help you do your job as much as I can. My job is a lot of back and forth with my law clerks. So for instance, I was up till 1:30 this morning finishing a draft of an opinion so that when my clerk woke up this morning and turned the computer on, she would have it in front of her. And so, you know, the characteristics I think are working together, being sure that everybody feels like they're a valued and contributing member, checking in, seeing if there's anything you can be of assistance with. I'm not a heavy-handed sort of person, and I know there are people who are, but that just hasn't worked for me, and it doesn't work to me either.
Those sound like great characteristics to me. We have one more, and this one includes a little shout out.
Okay.
This is from Dr. Tisha Carter. She says, "Hello, Judge Stewart. Past student of yours at Ursuline and wife of Jason Carter, another former student and colleague. Now that I've gotten those shout outs out of the way, what advice would you give to African-American women currently seeking leadership positions in Ohio that has the stigma of being the state where African-American women are least likely to acquire professional success?"
In a state where Ohio has the stigma of being the state where African-American women are least likely to acquire professional success. I'm glad I didn't know that when I was running for the Supreme Court. So thank you, Tish. I don't let those sort of things get in your way. They're distractions, in all honesty. And for example, when I decided to run for the Ohio Supreme Court, now mind you, I ran in 2018 for the first time and was successful in that election. Statewide election. I got to the Court of Appeals in 2006 after having run unsuccessfully in 2000 and 2002. So I had to run 3 times to get to the Court of Appeals. You know, a smaller venue in a county that's largely Democratic and in a county that probably has more diversity on the bench than any other of the counties in the state of Ohio. So you take that with my trying to get to a statewide position in a state that's traditionally Republican in voting, a red bloc. I had a colleague come into my office at the Court of Appeals, close the door behind her, grab a chair, pulled it up to my desk, and got close to me like this and said, "I heard you're thinking about running for the Ohio Supreme Court. Are you crazy? You're going to get slaughtered." So that was my first comment to running to the Supreme Court. And I just said to her, one, you underestimate me if you think I'm just going to roll out of bed and decide to run for the Supreme Court. That's not something you do. The time, the money, the effort, the energy involved. So rest assured, I have done some homework in making this decision. And I would not run for a position that I did not feel I could win. And I would not run for a position where I felt I would be slaughtered and could be slaughtered. I didn't know that I would win the race, but I knew I wouldn't be slaughtered from the race because we did some homework ahead of time. So don't let, I mean, people are sometimes very honest in their perceptions and their views based on history. And history doesn't favor us all that much for positions, particularly in leadership positions. And that has to change. I see now that there is a national trend to go negative with a lot of African-American women prosecutors across the state, because these prosecutors are trying to bring out, meting out justice in the criminal justice system, not just prosecutions and putting people in jail forever for any type of crime. They're trying to do justice in the job, and they're being highly criticized for it. And so that's going to be a stigma, I think, that all African-American women who try to get in those type of positions will be. And I'm not naive to not recognize that a lot of what I do will, fortunately or unfortunately, reflect upon other African women behind me who try to do the same thing. And I tell people too, and even though I was the first African-American woman elected to the Ohio Supreme Court, Yvette McGee Brown was the first to serve on the court when she got appointed in 2010 by Governor Strickland. So she was first, and she was appointed. And I say to people, and I'm very candid about this too, I don't know that I make it to be elected to the court had she not served with dignity and served well in the 1.5 years and one plus years that she served on the bench. Because I think she showed people too, wow, you can't have a Black female justice who doesn't lean right or doesn't lean left, and who upholds the law, and who people respect. And so I thank her for that and in serving in that capacity, because had her service been terrible or she'd been stigmatized somehow, that would have come on me too. That the other party would have used it against me, or some other people would have used it against me, and people pander to ignorance. And so I'm under no illusions that it's just my work and my efforts. So I think that's a burden, unfortunately, that we carry. I think women carry it in general, and I think people of color carry it in general. I think minority groups carry it in general, but that's just how it is now. And so you're not just putting your own reputation out there. You're either opening the path or closing the path for others behind you.
That's very true. I mean, a thank you from Dr. Carter. Anyone else have any questions?
Yeah, so if you have questions, feel free to unmute and ask.
Oh, good. I get to hear voices.
Yeah.
Great. No questions?
This reminds me of the movie that was on TV, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, when you do the Bueller.
Just Stewart, I had a question. It is related to what you were talking about before. Should just in general, regardless of gender or ethnic background, should you live your life in a way to dispel any sort of stigma that may be placed on your particular subset, or your, the category that you fall into? Should you actively work to dispel any stigma, justified or not?
Well, there are some people believe that others' preconceived notions about an individual, excuse me, are just their preconceived notions. And they don't feel the sense of responsibility or obligation to dispel those. I don't know whether I feel an obligation or responsibility. I can't exactly pinpoint it, but it is certainly an awareness. But I have to say that I generally don't act out of character. For the most part with me, what you see is what you get at all times. I am not quick to anger, thank goodness. I don't have a short fuse. I don't have a short temper. I didn't grow up with a lot of profanity in my life, so I don't use it myself, at least not that often. No, I mean, generally I don't. I try to meet people where they are, and I try to, when dispelling notions, first of all, let me say this. When I campaigned statewide, and I tried to get to all 88 counties, and some people were shocked by that because they said there are going to be some places where you're not going to feel welcome, where they're not going to welcome you. And I said, that's okay. I didn't get to all 88, I only got to 62 counties. And I said, that's okay, because my assumption is I am going to be treated with respect, and that people are going to listen to me and listen to what I have to say. And I walk into every situation like that unless somebody proves me wrong and shows me otherwise. And so I do recognize that I went to communities and places where they generally were not exposed to people who looked like me, or they were not exposed to African-American women, particularly African-American professionals, let alone African-American judge. And so I might start off saying something that would break down or dispel any preconceived notions they have, or break down any hesitancy to not listen to what I'm saying. And it could be something as simple as riding in, I saw that their football team had just won their regional championship or something. So before I even talk to them, I'd say, hey, how about those Bobcats, and your football victory? And undoubtedly, parents or grandparents in the audience of some of those kids, and they would clap and they would be happy. And then they'd come over afterwards and tell me the story about how their grandson was the middle linebacker and how many tackles he had, and those sort of things. And I think once that they saw that I'm interested in some of the same things that they're interested in, that I'm not an alien, we're really more alike than we are unalike, then it made them say, well, let me listen to what she has to say. And if I like it, and let me say this too, which I think might be different from a lot of candidates. I never asked people, particularly when I'm standing at the polls, to vote for me. I would say, I'm a candidate for this office. Here's my literature. If you like what you read, I'd appreciate your vote. Because I get tired of people telling me who to vote for. I do my homework when I vote. Of course, all of us who are lawyers or work in the law profession absolutely know who to vote for judges. And we have our friends and relatives call us all day, all the time. All these judges on the ballot, I don't know who to vote for. Most are uncontested. What do I do? There's no D or R behind the name, which is a good thing in my opinion, that there are no D's or R's behind the name. And so, finding out that information, I think is a good thing. And so that's a long-winded response to the question, but so I think, there's some ways to dispel some notions, but whether you feel it's your obligation or responsibility to do so, some people feel that it isn't. And I think if you can move forward in the conversation or get to a mutual place of respect, then you need to do your part, whatever that part is.
I like that, finding common ground to
Yeah.
kind of reach across whatever the aisle is.
Exactly.
We do have a couple questions that popped up while you were answering that one.
Okay.
One is, what piece of advice are you giving to current young women, especially those of color?
What piece of advice are you giving to current young women, especially those of color? The one piece of advice I think I give to everyone, but particularly younger women, is to not be discouraged if you haven't found your niche yet. Again, I am a classic example, and you think I'm kidding when I say this, but I'm a classic example of still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. I really am. People say, what are you passionate about? Well, I've never really been passionate about anything because I'm just not a passionate person, at least not when it comes to jobs or positions. I'm not a marcher, I'm not a protester. And that's not to say that I disparage any of those things, because I think those things are effective. But I'm not one of those people. I'm not going to shout at you. I'm not going to yell and scream. I don't have that elevated level of emotion. So I've never found a passion. And even though I love music and I like composing, I like doing things with it, and I love listening to music, I don't even know if that's a passion. So if I listen to people that say to me, do what you're passionate about, I wouldn't be doing anything, right? So that works for some people though. And so I don't want to dispel that. That works. But I'm a classic example, still trying to figure out what I want to be when I grow up. But in the meantime, I have had these wonderful opportunities and this meaningful work life and this meaningful life experience. And I wouldn't trade it for anything in the world. I am blessed by the opportunity to make a difference in people's lives. I am blessed with the opportunity to even, for the organizers of this event, to even want me to be on this session, to talk to you. And so, the real answer is that I don't know that there is an answer, but you will know it when you're there, and you will know the opportunity when it presents itself. And it doesn't have to be on as grand a platform as the Ohio Supreme Court, or as grand a platform as an elected office. I mean, we work together, everybody. I told a friend's mother recently who was still in awe about my being elected to the Supreme Court. And I'm proud that she's proud. Don't get me wrong. I love that my family and my friends mothers and my colleagues are proud of my getting to the Supreme Court. But I said to her, but keep it in perspective. If I don't do my job for a month, it's likely not to affect you. But let your garbage collector not pick up your garbage for a month,
Right.
and see how that affects you. So
Good
again,
point.
it's not just the title, it's not just the lofty position. Everybody has to do his or her part. And that's when we work better as a society, when everybody does their part without regard to the notoriety of the position. And so I say to younger people, don't always feel that you have to reach for the brass ring, because sometimes it might be building the ladder to get to the ring, or heaving somebody up on a step to be there, or being heaved up on the step that for you to get there. But there's a whole lot of other underlying things that have to happen in the meantime, and just look for those things.
Great. Let's just do one more question. I know a whole bunch have popped up, Elizabeth, but we're running out of time, so I'm gonna let you pick one.
Well, a lot of these are just comments, and I think you can see them too, Justice Stewart.
Okay.
Thanking you. But there was one more that was a question. Some thank yous in there as well. And as a woman in a leadership position, what is some general advice you have for gaining respect in a male-dominated industry?
It's a woman leadership position. What is some general advice you have for gaining respect in a male-dominated industry? I tell you, this has got to be a prime opportunity for women. And again, no disparagement at all to men, but if you look at the things that are happening in our society, and not that women don't do things wrong either, but if we look at the corruption scandal going on at the Ohio legislature level with the former House Speaker and the First Energy thing, and if we look at the allegations of corruption and misuse of funds, and the Bernie Madoffs, and all those people are men. I'm going, we don't, women don't generally, and I don't know if it's a gender thing, but when women get in positions of power, they don't seem to be likely the ones to abuse it as much. Even in our disciplinary things that we see at the Supreme Court with judges and with lawyers, I got to tell you, they're primarily men. And I don't know what that's about. And I don't know whether it's because men have so long been in leadership positions in our nation that they take it for granted. And so that when women get there, we realize that, if we do something, it'll equate to all of us. And that doesn't paint, I don't mean to paint everybody with a broad brush, because there are men who would never think of doing some of the things that some other folks have done. And so we just have to, I think we gain respect by doing the job in a way that is respectful, quite frankly. Regardless of whether anyone chooses to recognize it, I think that's what we do. So you do the best you can. Always, too, let me say this, always continue to learn in your job. I don't know that anybody gets in a job that they perfect and say, well, drop the mic, there's nothing else for me to do here. I'm fortunate to have a job where my erudition has to increase exponentially, because we don't get the same cases, unlike the Court of Appeals or trial courts, who get a lot of repetition in some of the things that they do. We don't. You can only get into the Supreme Court if your case is of great importance or public importance to the state. And so we have to do a lot of learning and a lot of researching and extra writing, extra stuff. So always keep learning in your position. There are ways to do it better, even if it's just technology that makes it better to do. And I think that will speak volumes for your level of respect and your confidence in your field.
This was a wonderful conversation today. Thank you, Justice Stewart. Let's give Justice Stewart a virtual round of applause. As I share with you, I have a page of notes, and my neck actually hurts from all the nodding I've been doing, agreeing with you through. And I do think most men stink, so I understand what you were saying there in terms
Don't
of
say that.
corruption. So.
We all have men that we love dearly in our life.
You know, it's been joyful watching you rise in many ways, and the great work that you do, and I suspect will continue to do. And as the country is considering a United States Supreme Court justice, I am hopeful that one day I can sit there and say Melody Stewart is a candidate for one of those roles as well. And we knew her when, and we had her on our computer screen. So we wish you all, we wish you a lot of success. Thank you so much. On behalf of the Cleveland State Alumni Association, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope to have you at a future Women's Leadership Luncheon Series program. Thank you all.